The warm morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of Sterling National Bank as customers quietly waited for their turn. Near the back of the line stood a modestly dressed single father holding his young daughter's hand. His worn work boots, faded jeans, and old jacket attracted disapproving glances from several wealthy clients. When the elegant CEO of the bank walked through the lobby for an executive meeting, she paused, looked at the father from head to toe, and casually instructed a security guard to make sure that man wasn't disturbing premium customers. The little girl lowered her eyes, embarrassed by the whispers around them. The father simply smiled gently at his daughter and said nothing. What no one inside the bank knew was that he personally held over $500 million in deposits at that very institution, and within hours, the CEO would discover the truth in the most unforgettable way imaginable. If you believe kindness, humility, and second chances matter more than appearances, please like this video, share it with someone who believes every person deserves respect, leave a heartfelt comment, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise for more emotional stories that inspire hope. The man's name was Owen Barrett. 5 years earlier, he had lost his beloved wife, Clara, after a sudden illness left him raising their daughter, Grace, alone. Despite inheriting a successful international logistics company built by Clara's family, Owen never enjoyed luxury for its own sake. He preferred driving an old pickup truck, wearing practical clothes, and spending afternoons coaching Grace's youth soccer team instead of attending glamorous business events. Wealth had never changed the values his late wife taught him. Character always mattered more than appearance. That particular morning, Owen had come to Sterling National Bank for a simple reason. Grace had recently turned 10 years old, and he wanted to open a charitable education trust in her mother's memory that would provide scholarships for children who had lost a parent. The paperwork required his personal signature because the initial funding would come directly from one of his long-term investment accounts held at Sterling National. Meanwhile, Victoria Emerson, the newly appointed CEO of Sterling National Bank, had spent months restructuring the institution. Brilliant and ambitious, she believed image was everything. She wanted every branch to project exclusivity and prestige, especially when influential investors visited. Seeing Owen's modest appearance, she immediately assumed he was in the wrong place. Without asking a single question, she quietly instructed the branch manager to move him away from the executive banking area. The manager hesitated. Something about Owen seemed strangely familiar. But before he could respond, Victoria walked away, convinced she had protected the bank's reputation. Grace noticed everything. She squeezed her father's hand and softly asked why people sometimes treated others differently because of their clothes. Owen knelt beside her and smiled. He explained that people often make decisions before learning someone's story, but kindness should never depend on what another person wears. Those words stayed with Grace. A few minutes later, Owen was invited into a private office by an experienced senior banker named Margaret Ellis, who had managed his family's accounts for years. The moment Margaret saw him, she warmly welcomed both father and daughter. Victoria happened to walk past the office. She stopped immediately. Why was one of the bank's most senior private bankers personally greeting a casually dressed customer? Curious, she quietly asked an assistant who the man was. The assistant checked the internal client system. Within seconds, her face turned completely pale. She slowly looked back at Victoria and whispered words the CEO never expected to hear. "That's Mr. Owen Barrett, one of the largest individual depositors in the entire bank." Victoria froze. The account summary continued appearing across the secure screen. More than $500 million in deposits. Multiple international investment portfolios. Long-standing institutional relationships. The customer she had silently judged only moments earlier wasn't simply wealthy. He was one of the most important clients Sterling National had ever served. And what happened after Victoria walked toward that office would change both of their lives forever. Victoria Emerson stood frozen outside the private banking office as the truth settled heavily on her heart. For years she had believed she could judge a client's importance within seconds simply by observing appearance, clothing, and confidence. Yet the humble single father she had quietly dismissed was not only one of Sterling National Bank's largest depositors, but also a man whose charitable foundations and long-term investments had supported thousands of families across the country. She realized that she had made the very mistake she often warned her employees never to make. Taking a deep breath, Victoria entered the office and politely introduced herself. She sincerely apologized for the misunderstanding in the lobby and admitted that she had allowed appearances to influence her judgment. Owen Barrett looked at her calmly, smiled with quiet kindness, and accepted her apology without anger. He explained that he had experienced similar situations many times before and that people often confused simplicity with failure. What concerned him most was not the way he had been treated, but the fact that his young daughter had witnessed someone being judged without being known. Grace listened quietly beside her father. Victoria knelt beside the little girl and apologized directly to her as well. She promised that every customer who entered Sterling National deserved equal respect, regardless of appearance. Grace smiled softly. Children often forgive more quickly than adults. As the scholarship trust documents were finalized, Margaret Ellis explained the true purpose of Owen's visit. The account would immediately fund educational grants for children who had lost one or both parents, ensuring they could continue their education without financial fear. Victoria was deeply moved. She had assumed Owen came to manage his fortune. Instead, he had come to give much of it away. The story quickly spread throughout the bank's executive offices. Employees who had witnessed the morning incident began reflecting on their own behavior toward customers. Some admitted they had unconsciously treated wealthy-looking clients differently. Others confessed they had never realized how easily small actions could hurt someone who was already carrying life's burdens. Inspired by Owen's quiet example, Victoria announced an immediate internal review of customer service policies. She introduced new training focused on empathy, respect, and eliminating unconscious bias. Every employee, from security guards to senior executives, would receive the same message. No customer's value could ever be measured by appearance. The changes attracted attention far beyond the bank. Business magazines praised Sterling National's new customer-first philosophy. Community organizations applauded the scholarship program. Customers began sharing stories of feeling genuinely welcomed for the first time. Meanwhile, Grace visited several of the scholarship recipients with her father. She met children whose lives had been changed by opportunities they never thought possible. Watching them laugh reminded Owen why Clara had always believed that wealth should create hope rather than status. One afternoon, Victoria invited Owen to speak privately at the bank's annual leadership conference. She expected him to deliver a speech about finance or investing. Instead, he told a simple story. He described the years after losing his wife, raising Grace alone, and choosing to live modestly because happiness had never depended on expensive possessions. He explained that every dollar in his accounts represented years of responsibility, sacrifice, and promises made to his late wife, not a reason to feel superior to anyone else. The entire auditorium remained silent. Many executives wiped away tears. Victoria realized she had learned more from one humble father in a single afternoon than from years of expensive leadership seminars. But just as the conference ended, Margaret Ellis hurried into the room carrying an urgent file. Someone had attempted unauthorized access to Owen's largest trust accounts. And the investigation pointed toward a shocking betrayal. From someone inside the bank itself, morning sunlight filled the executive boardroom as silence settled over everyone present. Margaret Ellis carefully placed the investigation file on the polished table while Victoria Emerson and Owen Barrett listened without interrupting. The bank's internal security team had uncovered evidence that someone inside Sterling National had attempted to gain unauthorized access to Owen's charitable trust accounts. Those funds were meant to provide scholarships for thousands of children who had lost a parent. Whoever was responsible had not been trying to steal from a billionaire alone, they had been trying to steal hope from countless families. The investigation moved quickly. Digital records, security logs, and financial audits all pointed toward one senior executive who had secretly planned to transfer money through a network of shell companies. He believed that because Owen rarely appeared in person and lived such a modest life, suspicious activity would go unnoticed for months. Instead, the attempted fraud was discovered before a single dollar left the accounts. The executive was immediately dismissed and later arrested after authorities completed their investigation. News of the case spread across the financial world. Reporters praised the bank for acting decisively, but Victoria refused to take credit. During the press conference, she openly admitted that the greatest lesson of the entire situation had come from Owen, not from the investigation itself. She confessed that on the day they first met, she had judged him by his appearance instead of his character. She explained that if she had continued believing appearances determined a person's value, she might never have truly known one of the kindest clients her bank had ever served. The speech touched millions of people. Across the country, banks, businesses, and customer service organizations began discussing fairness, dignity, and unconscious bias. Many adopted new employee training inspired by Sterling National's transformation. Owen quietly returned to his ordinary routine. He continued driving his old pickup truck. He continued wearing the same comfortable clothes. He continued taking Grace to school every morning. Nothing about his lifestyle changed because he had never needed wealth to define who he was. Several weeks later, Victoria visited Owen's home without cameras, reporters, or security. It was a modest house filled with family photographs, children's drawings, and memories of Clara. Grace proudly showed Victoria the first letters she had received from students whose education would now be funded through the scholarship program. One letter simply read, "Because of your family, I can keep dreaming." Victoria struggled to hold back tears. She realized that $500 million sitting in a bank account was impressive. But $500 million changing thousands of lives. That was extraordinary. Before leaving, Victoria handed Grace a small framed plaque that would later hang inside Sterling National's headquarters. It displayed the bank's new guiding principle. Every person deserves respect before they are judged. Grace smiled and looked at her father. Owen nodded quietly. He knew Clara would have loved those words. Months later, Sterling National officially renamed its annual Community Scholarship Initiative in Clara Barrett's memory. Every year, hundreds of children received educational opportunities because one family believed kindness should outlive success. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who believes people should never be judged by appearances, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to Kindness Paradise for more emotional stories about hope, family, and second chances. Special request. Comment, respect costs nothing, but changes everything. As the golden afternoon sunlight reflected across the entrance of Sterling National Bank, Owen and Grace walked away hand in hand just as they had on the day everything began. The balance in Owen's account had never been the greatest treasure he possessed. His greatest wealth had always been the values he passed on to his daughter. Because money can fill a vault, but only kindness can fill a legacy.